What's up, guys? My name's Brandon and welcome back to Apple Weekly. This week was extremely eventful, just as expected, because we did have the iPhone 14 event on Wednesday, followed by the RC build of iOS 16 and iOS 15.7. And then just yesterday, on Friday, we were able to pre-order those brand new Apple products that are launching next week. So we're going to talk about all of those subjects, along with some iPhone 14 tidbits that you might not know, and what to expect next week, because next week will definitely be the most eventful week of the year. So prepare yourselves. And as always, if you guys want to stay updated with all things Apple, make sure to click that subscribe button down below so you don't miss all of my iPhone 14 and iOS 16 coverage. All right, so let's start with iOS 15.7 RC. And that was a release that Apple pushed out shortly after the iPhone 14 event on Wednesday. And this one was kind of unexpected, since we did figure that the next iOS 15 release would be in the form of a public release and not a beta. But it did come, and it didn't really change too much. As a matter of fact, if you updated, you probably didn't even tell any difference from 15.6.1, and that's because this update was mainly pushed out for AirPods Pro 2 compatibility. So there are no release notes available. There's nothing about the security or anything like that. So we're gonna have to wait until the public release of 15.7 drops before we see, if anything else has been addressed with this update, which I'm sure there are a couple of other things that have been addressed. But anyways, moving on to iOS 16. So we did get the RC build, and the final public release is coming on Monday, September 12th. So we are just hours away from the big release of iOS 16. But I did make a video on the RC build here on the channel, but there are a few other tidbits that I wanted to mention, and just some things that were found in the code courtesy of Steve Moser. So the RC build includes support for the AirPods Pro 2, just like the iOS 15.7 release candidate. And then there are also multiple modes for the new iPhone 14 action mode feature. So this is the feature where it's like a stabilized, zoomed in look, like an action film. And we now see, based on the code, that there are multiple modes available for this feature. The code also reveals that Pro RAW images shot on the iPhone 14 Pro will be about 3 times larger in size compared to the 13 Pro's images. So if you use Pro RAW, you definitely want to make sure that you have at least 256 gigabytes of storage. In settings on the iPhone 14, it says wake and unlock iPhone when you tap the display or swipe up from the bottom edge of the lock screen. So it appears that there's going to be a new way to unlock your phone. Instead of just tapping on it when it's locked, you could also kind of swipe up from the bottom of the phone while on the lock screen. So that's interesting. I'll have to see how that works, if it's easier and better than tapping, but that is a feature included with the iPhone 14, along with this one, which I found very interesting: play sound when iPhone is powered on and off. So we did see this on Twitter. Multiple people reported on this, and we also have the sound that is going to play on the iPhone 14 when you boot it up and when you boot it down. So just like a Mac has, the chime, the little jingle when you boot it up, we're now going to have that on the iPhone 14. And here's what it sounds like. There's also an added accessibility feature for Dynamic Island, where it says double tap to open app. So on the iPhone 14 Pro, you're going to be able to double tap on the Dynamic Island, which is the new pill-shaped cutout up top, to open up an application quickly. And there are several other changes and additions in the code as well. And it kind of gives us a sneak peek, kind of spoils some of the early settings of the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro, along with the Apple Watch Ultra. As for the bugs, performance, and battery life, nothing has changed since my What's New video on Wednesday. So there's really nothing new to mention here. I do think this build is good enough for your main device. Just don't expect perfection right away. Battery life is not as good as iOS 15 just yet, and there will be some minor bugs, some minor UI, hiccups, but those will get ironed out as we progress with iOS 16. All right, so now let's talk about what to expect next from Apple. So next up, like I mentioned earlier, is the final public release of iOS 16, and that is coming out right here on Monday, September 12th. Now, that very same day or the next day, we could see iOS 16.1 beta 1. So Apple does usually release the next beta immediately after the big public release. So we can expect that within a day or two after the iOS 16 public release gets pushed out. And then later that week, right there on Friday the 16th, is when all of the new Apple products get released. Well, not all of them, most of them. So the iPhone 14, the Apple Watch Series 8, and the AirPods Pro 2. The only ones that are not going to be released on the 16th are the Apple Watch Ultra and the iPhone 14 Plus. And then of course iPadOS 16 and macOS Ventura will both be released in October. Alright, so now let's move on to the latest Apple news. And for this episode, I don't want to change the subject at all. So I just want to talk about the new Apple products coming next week. I want to talk all about the iPhone 14 because really nothing else is relevant at this point. All eyes are on the new Apple products coming next week. So let's start off with the speed increase on the 14 Pro compared to the 13 Pro, because a new Geekbench test has revealed that the A16 in the iPhone 14 Pro is 17% faster than the A15 in the 13 Pro. Now I know what you're asking, will this actually be noticeable at all in like day-to-day usage? And for some, yes, I think it will if you're very technical and you really compare the two side by side, but for most people, probably not a whole lot. And that's probably going to be, that was probably a big reason that Apple stuck with the A15 chip on the regular 14 and 14 Plus, because even going up to the A16 chip would have very minimal impact. And also Apple would save on costs. So that's probably the main reason that Apple stuck with the A15 on the regular 14, but also probably because they just really want to push up and pump up the Pro line more than the regular iPhone 14s. And as far as sales go, it seems to be working, because a new report indicates that a whopping 85% of early iPhone 14 buyers are going to opt for the Pro model. So Ming-Chi Kuo said this: the latest offline pre-order survey for iPhone 14 series in China shows that the total order allocation for the 14 Pro and Pro Max is about 85%, while the 14 Plus has the lowest order allocation at less than 5%. And that sub 5% is actually pretty interesting for the 14 Plus, because I think Apple really has high hopes for the 14 Plus, and they think it's going to sell pretty well. And I also think it's going to sell well, but I think it's going to sell very similar to the 12 and 13 minis, where it doesn't sell a lot right away, but down the road, once people get familiar with, what these new models are, then I think the 14 Plus will take off in sales. But I don't think it's going to be an immediate winner. But long term, I think the 14 Plus will definitely be a winner. And Kuo also had some more to add on to those stats. So he said, pre-orders for Apple's high-end products have always been more popular in the early stage. This year's order allocation of Pro models is higher versus previous years from this survey, reflecting Apple's product segmentation strategy change, where only Pros receive major updates. And then Kuo also mentioned something pretty interesting about the iPhone 15. So he said this: I believe Apple will create more differentiation between iPhone 15 Pros and iPhone 15 standard models to increase Pro shipment allocation and the new iPhone average sales price. Taking a step further, Apple will also start creating differentiation between the 15 Pro Max and the 15 Pro. It's the best practice via a precise product segmentation strategy to generate more sales and profits in a mature market. So I can definitely see Apple going this route, and they're kind of already doing it here with the 14 and 14 Pro. So we'll have to wait and see what 2023 brings for the iPhone 15 and 15 Pro. And then speaking of buying iPhones, Brazil has finally been overtaken as the home to the world's most expensive iPhone. So Brazil has held this title for a few years now, I believe like 3 years, but now another country has them beat. And it's not really a good award, but Turkey has now beaten Brazil for the most expensive iPhone 14. So in Turkey, the base model, the 128 gig iPhone 14, costs a US equivalent of $1,699. That is $1,700 for a base model, the cheapest iPhone 14 you can get. And the cheapest 14 Pro is $2,200. And then if you wanted to go to the top of the line, the iPhone 14 Pro Max with 1 terabyte of storage, that is $3,136. That is just absurd. So if you're watching this video from Turkey, my condolences to you. I hope things get cheaper there over the years. But anyways, guys, there you have it. Those are just a few little tidbits about the iPhone 14 from this past week, along with some additional updates on iOS 15.7 and iOS 16. Now, just a heads up, I will be skipping Apple Weekly next weekend. So next Saturday, I will not have an Apple Weekly episode come out. That's just because I'm going to be too busy with iPhone 14, iOS 16, Apple Watch, AirPods coverage. There's going to be too much going on that I'm not going to be able to get an episode recorded for Apple Weekly. So I'm going to skip next week, but I'll pick back up the following week. But anyways, if you guys enjoyed this video and if you enjoyed this series, I would appreciate if you give it a thumbs up. Also, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of that iPhone 14 coverage. But anyways, guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.